So today, Fran, Sovay and Alga will be discussing making in relation to identity. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Imogen.
That's okay.
We're using these microphones because I know it's not a very big room, but we're recording it. And we may be able to put it out as a MESKLA podcast. So there's a whole series of podcasts available via the website or popular podcast platforms. Check it out. So, Fran, Agnieszka, thanks so much for joining me. I really was intrigued about having a conversation with you guys around identity and the work we make, and then the various kind of boundaries in relationship to the other people who intersect with our personal stories, but also with the subjects that we're discussing. It always feels to me that I have a sort of personal drive or responsibility to amplify some of the sort of subject matter or themes that I want to sort of talk about in the work, but I'm also really sort of aware of how within my personal relationships different people might be impacted by those stories or those conversations, but also more broadly other people who perhaps share similar experience or identify as to me might have a different view to me. And that's kind of what I've tried to build into these workshops and conversations within MESKLA, is to kind of gather all those other interpretations. So, I wondered how you both felt about that, really. Amanda, Fran, do you want to start us off? Because Maids, your project Maids, is really quite evidently kind of connected to your experience, isn't it?
Yeah, so I am from Cornwall. I've lived here forever. And Maids is about photographing young women and girls in Cornwall who don't feel a sense of belonging. And it's about trying to find that through archives mainly and dressing up. It's kind of more facilitating spaces to let them explore themselves. And I'm kind of just guiding conversation, I suppose. But yeah, it's about using a lens to it's like an idea of self-care for them. It's providing a space, and through dress up, talk, that's kind of how it goes.
And you really kind of riff off Bowel Maidens, don't you?
Yeah. So basically, when I was growing up, we were taught about tin miners and Bowel Maidens. That's kind of where the line was drew. And tin miners were always shown as kind of the hero. They were down in the mines, kind of grafting, making a really good job of it. And Bowel Maidens were kind of on the top, just looking pretty in a white dress and a bonnet. And I just didn't feel any affinity with that. And I think very few Cornish women actually do. So I was actually moving to London, and then I was like, why? Why should I leave because I don't feel like this is where I belong, when actually my family have lived here for hundreds of years? How is that fair when my brother has kind of been swept into this fishing and farming life? So I started to look at archives to try and find women that I actually kind of understood and saw around me. So starting with Bowel Maidens, actually, when I started to look into them, they worked really, really hard. Their dresses were made of sacks. Their shoes were actually made of metal, and the gooks were to keep the dirt out of their eyes, and they wore sacks on their hands as well. It was really, really hard graft, and there is no difference between them and the miners. It's just from the archives what is being presented, which I think is quite evident in how Cornwall is very patriarchal and who is deciding the archives. I then started looking more, and I actually found a really cool picture, and it's of the Red Roof in Camborne carnival queens and beauty queens. And I was so unaware of that. I live really girly and love all those things. I was kind of that's not Cornwall. And there's this whole world of nurses, children, families, and just things that I never really knew or was ever told about. And it made me realise actually there were people then that I'm seeing now. And there are roots here for me and all of these other women that we weren't aware of. So I kind of am using that to build a platform of kind of like, we belong here, there's a voice for you that I never felt, and I'm kind of trying to make that voice louder and making girls feel a sense of identity in somewhere they probably just don't feel like they belong. Because if I felt like that, I'm pretty sure that other girls probably feel like that as well.
And the Maids project there's an exhibition that you've curated of young female Cornish artists at Newlyn.
Yeah, so I kind of have, it started off with Maids, which is when I photographed young women around Cornwall. I took huge prom dresses and kind of was reliving this dream of really girly pinkness that kind of isn't really massively shown in Cornwall. And that naturally grew into curation, and my exhibition's called Cornish Maids, which is where I photograph I show all female artists in Cornwall. There's no kind of rules on age or anything. It's just as long as you're making work in Cornwall about being female, that's kind of enough. But the exhibitions are kind of breaking barriers and getting rid of the highbrow ideas of what it feels like to go into a gallery, because I never belonged in a gallery. I never went. I actually didn't go until I got the show at Newlyn Art Gallery, and then I went in there for the first time. And I was making a space that was inclusive. Like on the opening night, we had a piercing booth, transfer tattoos. We had a playlist that was all like Britney Spears. It was just really fun and was inviting, and yeah, I think it was one of the busiest nights they'd ever had. And it was, I think, because people felt like they could come and belong there, and they didn't feel overwhelmed by this world that was really clinical. And it was just fun, and it's just making spaces that people understand and can feel part of, where art can be a really good start for conversation, and people don't know they're learning through just actually having a nice time. And all the archives are also part of the curation, so it's archived images alongside artwork. Yeah, it's really nice, and that's kind of what it is.
Thanks, Fran. Thank you. Olga, would you mind then also just giving us a bit of an introduction to what you're doing? I mean, you have a long-standing and very far-reaching practice.
Yes. So I am originally a performer, but very much working in an experimental way within a theatre from early beginnings. And then I started directing. Now I'm really directing mainly and lecturing. And so in that sense, my work, like thinking about your question and talking about identity, my work is usually, not always, but most of it is with other people. And I do work with subjects of identity and belonging and the complexity of those terms and emotions, but often through other people and with other people, if it makes sense. So I, like you mentioned, I always start with myself, so I need to know that I want to dig a certain subject and look into it. So in that sense, there is personal, but then it's taken into a conversation with other people involved, and often, for me, it's a learning experience, and it's far away from my identity, or can be. Mm-hmm. So, for example, last year I was working in Poland, because I work in the UK and in Poland when I'm originally from. I worked on a project with binary, cis, non-binary and trans artists who are invited, and actors, to the theatre space on Orlando. And Orlando was deconstructed. There were just elements of Orlando. I somehow assume that you've probably heard about Orlando by Virginia Woolf, so there is a connection between the two countries. But that journey with that group of people for me was extremely revealing, and actually bringing lots of questions about where do I sit with that as a cis heterosexual woman. So that is just an example of how the conversation about identity can be taken further away from me. But of course, I am interested. The reason why I touch this topic is because I am interested in talking about feminism, non-binary, and challenging patriarchal structures and thinking. So, yes, and maybe about Revoice, because it's closer to home, it's the show which we've done here. It's with the choir from Penzance. And again, as you can hear, and I mentioned, I'm a first generation migrant, so I'm not originally from Cornwall. My family, I'm very Warsaw person, a capital city of Poland. And so I ended up living in a rural space from urban space, and it's a very interesting experience. And I think in terms of identity, I still try to understand what's happening. I've been in Cornwall for 11 years now, and in the UK nearly 20. But it's just interesting to digest that. So that's interesting, although my grandmother was from a village, and she moved to Warsaw, and that was a very special thing for her, and that she moved to the city, and so within 3 generations things changed quite rapidly. But I'm talking about it because there are lots of questions in terms of, for me personally, in terms of belonging and being here. And then I have a child here who was born in Truro, so I am, my ancestors are in graves in Warsaw. But then there is a future which is here, and I am definitely he kind of rooted me here, and he always says he's Cornish, although he's Polish, English, and Cornish, but he always says he's Cornish, and he loves the place. I mean, this is his home, so it's an interesting thing to be attached to a place through his eyes. But that brings lots of questions about my belonging and my identity, and working on Revoice project, which is very much about identity and belonging to this place. It's about being in Cornwall, in Penworth, and what it means to that group of people from the choir who is performing, and it's 36 of them, 35. As it happened by coincidence, which makes me very happy, they are only women and non-binary people, so it's also a voice of this particular group. And we went on a real journey in terms of discussing the concepts of identity and belonging and what it meant to people, and it was painful in places, and people were expressing very opposite views of feeling very rooted or not rooted. So in that sense, I'm connected with that because these conversations are so close to me, but it is their voices you can hear in the show. Yeah.
Thank you both. I was thinking about Fran, talking about the prom dresses and all that stuff, and what it is to be female in Cornwall, and then I was thinking about that in relation to your location in Warsaw and in Poland, and I'm in my early 50s now, and my experience growing up was that there was a real emphasis that you were meant to, as a female, dress up and wear loads of makeup, and I never felt like I was allowed to have access to that in the way I wanted to. I wasn't the type of female, and spent many years sort of not feeling that, say, girls getting dressed up for a Friday night was actually available to me, that I wasn't that type of female. And, the language, of course, of the late 80s has changed quite a lot, to where we're at now. But I wonder about, have you found people who come and say to you, that's not my experience of being, a young woman in Cornwall, for instance, and how do you deal with that conversation? Because you're not sort of representing all young women in Cornwall.
No. No, definitely not representing all young women in Cornwall. It's interesting, actually, because I photograph young girls, and so obviously I'm interacting with their mums. So that's really interesting because, like you're saying, I'm hearing it from different generations. And I rarely get kind of a negative idea about it, because people are often oh my gosh, I never got this chance, this is so much fun, let's explore this idea of femininity that kind of I didn't have access to. And if they did have access to it, they're yay, this is so fun, they want to be part of it. But I really haven't. Well, actually no, there was once I went to a farmhouse out kind of really far out, and it was really uncomfortable, I think, for everyone that was part of it. The girl really wanted to be there, and her mum had heard from a friend and was like, yeah, this is kind of what we're doing. But her dad and brother were just like made the environment really uncomfortable, and it was very clear that they were kind of like, what is this rubbish? Why do we care about her? Why do we care about what you've got to say? And it really reminded me of the childhood that I'd grown up with in a fishing and farming family, and it was like, oh my God, this is still, as much as people don't think that's a thing, it really, really is in Cornwall. And I think when people look at my work, it's often, oh, do we need this? Do we? And we really do. We really, really do. Because it's the fact that girls need it shows that there's a problem.
Yeah. And then maybe I was just thinking as you were talking, like, what both of you are doing is creating a space for that celebration of like certain voices, of different kinds of voices and of different ways of being. So you're creating a space for someone to go and perhaps access what might be considered sort of fripperies, like of dressing up, and how powerful that can be. And as an experience I've always had, like, I sort of gender non-conforming, I suppose, and have been hassled for instance, shaving, and hassled for not shaving by different groups of people. And my feeling is like, whatever I feel like it's my body. But it can take a long time to reach that point. So this, I don't know, there's something about creating a space for fluidity and change that seems to be that you're both sort of, that's what you're trying to hold on to.
Yes, maybe it's kind of like continuing on what you were saying. I'm listening to Fran in complete awe, and I just think it's so amazing what you do, because when I thinking about 80s, because we grew up at similar age, and we grew up in similar time, although in different countries, but music, the British and American music is everywhere, isn't it? Just thinking about that time, how different that was, how different was that world, and that our world is changing, and just listening to you and hearing how political that work is, how vibrant and how loud that young voice is just so brilliant. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think we went through a different journey, and I feel like it took me a very long time to see certain mechanisms and influences on me, and not that I understand them, I probably question them, but as a woman, as my role, as perception of me, of what I should be doing, what I was doing without even wanting doing it, but I felt the pressure to do it or behave in a certain way. And I guess with age now, I feel a little bit more like, that's me.
Yeah.
But I think it took me a long time to get into that place, and I'm saying that with some kind of sadness as well. Yes, I'm very much interested also in that space of aging, and what that means, and what that means for female identity as well.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, there's such a massive, it feels to me that the prevailing narrative of perimenopause, menopause and postmenopause is one of negativity, sadness and loss. Whereas personally, I found it enormously liberating.
Exactly.
I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm back to the kind of freedom of pre-menstruation years. It's awesome. The word is out. Postmenopausal life can be amazing.
There is hope. Yeah.
Don't listen to the hype. But now I've lost my thread. I got overexcited, and I'm having a hot flush. What I wanted to think about was this, I'm really hyper aware of how our personal stories do kind of bump up against other sort of people that we have personal relationships with, and how they interpret our stories, or how us being perhaps public about our personal stories or about our personal opinions kind of nudges into their lives or their personal space. And I wondered how either of you kind of deal with that, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I keep thinking of these personal stories because I think that probably this is where my work diverse a little bit, because often you collect the material and then you have a script and it can be fictional or it can be based on people's stories, but it's that part removed from me. However, there was a project I did called Polish Vermin, and that was after Brexit, and I don't know if people remember, but some Polish people experienced quite serious abuse, and there were laminated cards. I like the laminated element put on cars, so that when it was raining, they were not damaged. There was that thinking, and that laminated cards were saying Polish vermin, go home, or fuck off, basically. And I just thought I was very angry and grieving after Brexit. That talking about identity, that was huge, actually. But that's maybe for another conversation. But that was probably the most personal when I put myself back on the stage. And I thought, no, I need to make a solo project and respond to that, because I actually grieve. And I was very angry, and I just thought, and then there was that narrative when people were saying to me, but it's not you, because you're contributing to here, you are like ours, it's not about you, it's about these other people who are stealing jobs. And I was like, nah, I am a Polish vermin, like you want to talk about that, so I'm going to own it. So that's how the idea of creating a Polish Vermin show was born. And then I invited other two Polish artists, one photographer, Michał Iwanowski from Cardiff, and the other performer, Patrycja Kujawska from Bristol. And we developed the work together. But then at the end, I put myself back on stage, and I was talking about my experience of getting British citizenship. And that was an interesting one, because I'm thinking now about my mum seeing that, because we took it to Warsaw, and Patrycja was performing in English. That was a choice, and I kept reminding everybody that we are in the UK. And then there was British anthem, and all Polish audience was asked to stand up to the anthem, which is mine now, because I'm British now as well. And thank you, Brexit. And I think I'm thinking now about my close family and them seeing that, and I think it was as alien to them because they don't have that experience. It's almost like having a schizophrenic life, that you have two lives. So a part of my life here doesn't know my life there, and a part of that life there doesn't really know my life here. So that's an interesting one, because I think my mum then put the British flag, because we were giving as a present British flag to everybody. And my mum put that British flag on her windowsill in a pot with a plant. Don't know what that means, I'm not a huge fan of flags, by the way, just to clarify that this is a... But I also was thinking that often in my work I use provocation. So it's not necessarily telling a personal story, but to provoke certain emotion, and that emotion can be not a nice one. Mm-hmm. And then I have to deal with that. But that's my conscious choice as a creative person, I guess. So, but coming back to that Polish Vermin, when we performed it in New Lynn Gallery, and then friends came, and I think that response was very personal for them. But there was lots of apologies towards me, which was really interesting. And of course I was saying, you have nothing to apologize, you are my buddies, and I love you. But I think that kind of made people realize, because I recorded Polish people, and there were Polish people speaking about their experience, and English people talking about Polish people, and so it was quite revealing, And I'm saying on purpose English people, because I didn't have recordings from Cornwall. I had English people speaking about Polish people, and so I guess that was emotional response from people, but quite protective of me in that sense. But I guess that's a vulnerable situation. But coming back to provocation, I recently directed in Cornwall a show called Help, I Think I'm a Nationalist. I don't know if any of you saw it. And it's provocative, and it's very consciously provocative, and the response we had, talking about dialoguing with people, was quite emotional, and some people were angry, but I was very much interested in that discussion which was happening after. So it also interests me. Like, this is a conversation about how much the art is confessional. Obviously, private is political. Everything is political. So it's like how much the art is confessional, or how much the art is a creation to provoke something which goes beyond that moment of experiencing art. So how it can influence the social debate.
Yeah, you also mentioned like vulnerability there, and there is something in that about that sort of, that line of protecting oneself to an extent whilst also making oneself or like vulnerable enough to have this kind of work that is able to ignite response in a way. How do you feel vulnerable at all when you're like putting these shows together?
Yeah, I think like when I first started I did, because everything I do is truly from like the depths of my heart. And at first when I was doing it, I was like, I don't want anybody to see this is mine, it's my baby, this is like personal. And then I started to share it, and it was kind of like all of a sudden people were coming to me and wanted to know more and understood what I was saying. And it was really a change in my perspective, because I felt so alone. And then in that moment, like I had found a tribe, if you like, and it was something that I'd never really experienced before. And then once you get a fire in your belly, personally, I was just like all steam ahead. And that's when I started kind of mocking it, because I just found it quite funny. Because it's like all the men were like, oh God, we get it, we're wearing pink dresses. Oh. And I was like, you know what, this is quite funny. I don't know why you have an issue with this. So one of the main things was, I was talking to my granddad, I was telling him what I was doing, and he went, oh, don't you women have enough rights already? And I was like, what? And then my dad came to one of my exhibitions, he was like, why are there vaginas everywhere? It's like, what? Why is this your concern? The fact you've come into this space and you feel the need to say that is exactly why I'm doing this. So then I kind of really grasped onto that fact of, it's actually quite funny that this is a problem. It's still a problem. Like, what? So then I started making some kind of more political things. Like, last year I made T-shirts that said, good girls go to heaven, bad girls go to Cornwall. And it's kind of this actually kind of like taking the piss out of this unreal world of feminism in Cornwall that people don't expect. And I just find it quite funny, really. But it has such a heart to it. And that's the important bit. It's kind of, it has this really brash outline, and it's like, oh my God, this is really cool. But then that's why in the exhibitions and stuff I talk about the archives, because it does really have a heavy meaning. But I guess I use pop culture to kind of draw the eye, and then when you get there, it's like, actually, it looks really cool, and this is a really great time, and I've got you here, but now you're here. Let's talk about real issues. And I think it's a good way to kind of draw people in, because if you start shouting about archives and problems, often people don't come. They're like, people aren't interested, especially young people who I'm particularly trying to reach out to. But aesthetics often can be a good call. And then
I wondered if just you talking about the sort of crassness of things, like, is class involved in these conversations as well? I mean, definitely. It is, but like, I suppose where it is, like, it feels to me like the sort of politeness epidemic that like don't raise issues is, perpetuates the patriarchal systems, etc. And one of the things that I sort of very consciously did about bringing sort of a very hands-on, sort of traditionally working class labour of plumbing into a critical art space, as well as the kind of crassness of bright colours, was all very sort of kind of deliberate set of decision makings. I wonder, if just say briefly something about class in that, because I'd like to have time to see if anyone's got a question or contribution.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to be honest, I started thinking about class when I came to the UK, because it's so clear in the UK, and it's very based in this culture. But saying that, it took me some time to then reflect on the world I am from, and it's a little bit more complex because of Second World War, and because of in Poland, and loads of, however you call that class, intelligentsia, that we call them in Poland, was murdered during Second World War, officers, etc. And then there was communism. So the history, the context does matter, and the history was different. So communists were all about working class. So working class was elevated, although we never had that clear division which exists in a historical context in the UK, in terms of the royal family, aristocracy, and having the land and properties, etc. So that was all taken away, and it's a little bit more complex. But reflecting, it's a very new thought for me, so I'm sharing with you really recent thinking. I'm very much interested in visibility of older women and aging, like I mentioned before. And I honestly, it's the last 2 months, I started thinking how much I denied or didn't acknowledge the knowledge of my grandmothers in terms of their skills. And when you talk about class, like I said, one of my grandmothers had 4 classes of primary school and was brought up in a village near Warsaw with no shoes. They were so poor, and my granny had, till the end she lived, she had 15 kilos of sugar in her small flat in Warsaw in case the war comes and there is hunger. And she couldn't speak proper Polish, if you know what I mean. She had a slang. She was using her village slang. And she hated village. That was the funniest thing. She was like, village is the worst. And definitely as far from soil as possible. But it's really interesting how I kind of denied her through my life. I didn't think about her. You just go through your life and you do things and you meet people, and this is exciting. This is kind of forward thinking. And recently I was like, she was super fast at making dumplings. Do you know what I mean? That's a real skill, and that's the knowledge which is not acknowledged and not celebrated, and I don't have it. But I read books because my stepdad was encouraging me to read books and study English, and that was where I was taken, And then she was a very good knitter. She was knitting, she was earning money through knitting jumpers and being a tailor. So there is a personal project coming, and I feel it, and I definitely need to go there and possibly put myself into that space. But that, and also in the context of Cornwall, that really makes me excited that there's this Cornish son and the granny who's having a factory of dumplings, in her small flat, and smokes ciggy after ciggy. But that, I'm mentioning that because you asked about class, and I don't think I thought about it much. And I also think from Moore's perspective, I probably thought that she wasn't that worth my attention in that acknowledgement. And I'm saying that with real shame out loud here. But also it's my roots. This is where I was spending time when I was 5, with those dumplings. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry if it's too chaotic.
No. I think that distancing from dirt, is really. I think it's really pertinent to the whole conversation, and I've certainly had members of my family say to me, older members of my family, when I made the decision to train as a plumber, They were like, but you've got a degree. Why are you doing that? Why don't you go and be, you've got like I've got a teaching qualification. You could be a teacher. And
because it's about status as well.
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly.
I just think it's interesting just because you were just talking about kind of your new thoughts and how like childhood and other people can affect your practice. And it's really interesting because it's also made me think of something. So obviously I create spaces for women to be safe and have conversations. And I just thought my mum is a hairdresser and she's always done it in our kitchen. And like we always had women round and they were always talking in this safe space. And I've just realised like I think there must be some kind of link that I didn't realise of kind of wanting to make this safe space for women to come together. And I just had that thought and I just wanted to voice it. And also, we were talking earlier about how, because you live here now, how you felt distant from your family. I just wanted to say it was really interesting because, see, I live around my family, but I feel really distant and they're right here, which I just find really interesting that there's that distance and they're right here, but for me it's kind of an emotional distance and a cultural distance rather than an actual kind of distance. You know what I mean?
And what do you think, like, do you feel comfortable sharing what you think influences that? Is that to do with, like you said before, like you've got a degree and...
Yeah, well, I'm the only person in my family that had gone to uni. And when I said about it, they were like, why are you doing that? Don't do that. Get married, have a baby, marry a fisherman. I kid you not, that sounds wild, but that is literally the conversation I had. And they're like, if you go to uni, you're wasting your life. And I went to uni, and now I'm here talking to you guys, so...
You are all right.
I figured it out in the end. But yeah, so it was kind of like, I was odd to them. It was kind of like, I was like, oh God. I don't know, just like held at arm's length, I think. And even now, none of my family kind of are interested in what I do, like my exhibitions and stuff. And that's fine, because you find new family. You know what I mean? And what you do and the people that want to be there, and that's what matters. But yeah, it's just interesting. And also coming from a fishing and farming family, it's very, very traditional Cornwall. Like some of the things that come out of my uncle's mouth I would never repeat anywhere. And racially, kind of homophobia, everything that you can imagine is just like casual conversation. And it's wild, it's mental. And I think that's why, because I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And I think that's why they push me away, because I'm actually questioning something that they've always thought was okay. And I'm like, it's actually totally not fine. And I think that's why they're like, oh God, she's like the black sheep of the family. Which is totally fine, because I'm doing what I believe in. But yeah, I just think, you know, she said that earlier, it just made me really think how there's like correlation with that, but actually like they're different but the same.
It is not necessarily physical.
Yeah, and that's obviously like impacted both of our works, which I just think as artists that's quite interesting. How sometimes it's like what you lack is then you then put into what you create, because then out of what you create fills that gap. So it's kind of like you're creating a space that you belong in.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's actually it is from you. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're actively like, I want to do this, and then people join you and you make all these new connections. It's kind of like you fill that hole with other people. Like you have the choir, I have with maids. So I just think that's like a really interesting thing that is kind of just obviously appeared.
And quite a powerful moment. I wanted to see, thanks.
Sorry.
I wanted to see if anyone had any kind of contributions or thoughts or questions. Jo.
Hi. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So many things to do it. But I just, one specific thing I lost this. You're talking about class. And do you know what? I haven't thought about class recently, until yesterday, when I was asked to fill out the form on the iPad about this weekend.
Oh, so this is a Tate feedback form?
Yes. And and then obviously the people who are looking at this form are attempting to get some demographics about who is engaging and all that, which is laudable. It's an important thing to do, but you must look at the list of jobs and how it's described and the order they're in.
Oh, that's
Because
interesting.
I move across different things. You know, I have a PhD, puts me up at, I think number 2.
Sorry.
But I'm a director of a company, of 2 companies, all from Craig, you know, but anyway, director. But, I think that was I can't remember which one, that's quite high at the top. But it had to be a large company, and manager, not that. So you keep going down, and it said, do you have your own business? You know, it says, then it says, for example, I thought, that's me. You know, I have my own company or something. And it's, for example, plumber, carpenter. Must have a look at that. Yeah, but the point is that was quite far down. So
it's interesting, this harvesting.
It's in order. That's the thing. I wouldn't have, if it was all equal, that would be fine, wouldn't it? But it was in quite a conscious order, and somebody and it's probably a standard matrix. I think there's some work to be done about that.
Did you feel sort of placed in a?
I was laughing. I was with a friend. And I was laughing. I was like, now where am I going to put myself? And I thought, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go with the PhD, aren't I? Because it makes you feel kind of swanky. They're obviously making some kind of just like you were saying with the dumplings, would you put yourself as the dumpling maker or the PhD? And
I think
it's just a natural. Do you know what I mean? It's a natural kind of how we're brought up to see the PhD as better as the dumpling maker.
Totally.
It's just a kind of.
I think that kind of thing often though as well can make people feel really uncomfortable. You know what I mean? It's like you can come to this space and it's really amazing, but then you have to tell us about your class.
I've
just
never
feels
been asked those particular questions,
but
in that way either. And for funding, like European funding things, there are these lists of. What they want to know is who your arts council wants to know what your parents were doing when you were 14, I think. And were they clerical, were they managerial? And this was really quite strange. So.
But even though they're not actively saying what class are you, all of those things equal to what class you are, doesn't it? All of those questions, that's what it adds up to.
And it's not appropriate for Cornwall anyway, because we all do millions of things. You don't do one thing, do you?
No, exactly.
So, we are, and that's the lovely thing about Cornwall actually, is that we cross boundaries in that way, because you're a plumber and a teacher and an artist.
Yeah, but I wouldn't in my sort of dream world, I wouldn't have to do loads of different jobs. Do you know what I mean? It's actually really exhausting to have to manage multiple jobs. Yes. And I think the kind of class discussion I found it come into, it was in starker relief when I was much younger. Then it kind of backed off a bit through my later 20s and 30s. And then as I sort of got a bit older again, it was more noticeable, because the even playing field, you feel like you're all on even playing field. I mean, the first time I sort of really realised, whoa, that's the proper middle class, was when I did my MA at Royal College of Art. And it was oh, that's a glass ceiling, bang, my head really hurts now. But then you're all kind of in it together, and then you realise as you get older, there's a whole load of people who are oh yeah, I'm buying a house. Wow, how did you get that deposit together? We've all been doing the same thing, haven't we? And suddenly you realise 20 grand's popped up in someone's bank account from somewhere, and it's not coming to yours.
But it's interesting because I think class is such a complex thing, isn't it?
Vastly,
and then if you think about nowadays, are we talking about money? Are we talking about education? Because you can be a teacher and you can not be able to buy a house.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And where do you place yourself then? And probably middle class, but is it upper class or lower middle class? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or a plumber or a builder, and totally be able to.
Oh my God, I sometimes think, what am I doing?
I've a great move being a plumber.
But I just think it's really interesting. You made me think about this, because you were talking about the form, but actually because we're talking about identity and ways of expressing that identity. It's such a complex thing, isn't it? It's such a nuanced thing, and it's like the story about my grandmother. you know, like, why should I put myself on any list? I kind of, you know, I probably should be aware of my privileges now. I think that's really valid to acknowledge that, because I do have privileges. Like, all of us have have certain position in a society and should be aware of that. But actually the conversation sometimes is pointless when we try to overly define. I'm quite nervous about that, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know what I mean? Because it is a nuanced thing, and yeah.
But I think also that, like, a point is what Fran was sort of saying there about these forms can be really discomforting.
Totally.
And so, like, we've got this moment of being invited into, like, this public space. There's, like, you can get £5 locals tickets or whatever, come back as many times as you want for the year. And then you're asked those questions, to fill the form.
I think it just, like, really, it feels, for me, really intrusive. I just wanted to comment on class as well in Cornwall. I think it's really interesting because there's so many layers of class. For example, like, one of the most poverty-stricken places in the whole of Northern Europe is actually in Cornwall. But the people that come and stay in St Ives on holiday would probably be very, very shocked at that. So it's really bizarre to me. I live in Perranporth and we all slog our guts out over the whole of the summer, working crazy hours. Holidaymakers are loving it, having the best time ever. They then leave. There's no work for the whole of the winter. The town pretty much shuts down. And it's kind of like, they don't realise that. People that come here don't realise there's a real big issue financially in Cornwall, and housing crisis, all of those things that just people don't know. And when Boris Johnson came down for the G7 summit, I was just wanting to be like, on your way, do you want to just pop into Camborne? You know what I mean? And just see the real life of Cornish people. Like, mining stopping in Camborne and Red Roof literally caused such a decline financially, jobs, and it just puts people in a really rubbish position. And I just think it's not seen, and I think it's really relevant to a lot of artists that are creating work in Cornwall, because they've either been affected by it or they're aware of it. And yeah, I just think it should be spoken about more.
Yeah, thank you. Was there any other, I'll just see if there's any, was there any other sort of questions or thoughts?
It's kind of something for Fran, I think, probably more than anybody. Sorry, I guess I'm really interested. I've got two daughters who are not dissimilar age to you. One of whom has chosen to kind of move quite a long way away, and one who's chosen very much to stay here. And I'm just thinking about your practice, and I think it's fantastic. I don't know whether you went away and then came back, or whether you stayed here. But I think to be working in that, you know, to stay here and do the work that you're doing is really admirable, actually, and it's great that you're doing that. But I was just, I was wondering, are you able to talk a bit about that choice? So you didn't go away at all?
Well, I was actually accepted to a uni in London, and then I was like, why? Like, the work I do is in Cornwall. That's what makes me excited. They're the people I care about. So why am I running away to try and, like, chase this dream that I actually could find right here? And there's this quote that I put in all of my exhibitions, and it's, a child not embraced by its village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And that is kind of the epitome of the work I do. I never felt like I belonged. So I've, like, ripped apart Cornish culture and built it in a way that I understand, and it appears like a lot of women understand as well. So yeah, I just got, like, really annoyed, frankly. I was like, I'm going to try to do something about this. And I just did it for myself. And, like, I'm just super, super proud that I'm just facilitating this space, and other people are now coming into it, and we all are kind of, like, singing off the same hymn sheet. And it's so nice because we're getting loud and people are hearing us. And yeah, no, thank you for that question. That's really nice.
Thank you. Was there anything else either of you wanted to add? We're sort of coming to time, really. No. Well, I think, thank you both very much. Fran's curated show at Newlyn Art Gallery is running until, when is it on till?
June?
End May, early June,
No, it's
something
June.
like that.
It's
Is it June?
End of June. Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, Newlyn Exchange website.
Yeah.
We'll give you the details. And Arga, the performance is happening at 2 o'clock today and 4 o'clock.
Yes, it's at 2 and 4 o'clock. I also, if you don't mind, I would like to mention that together with Jennifer Fletcher, who is a choreographer of the show, I'm starting to work on a project. We're starting a big research on grandmothers in Penwith. So if anybody would like to join, or you know grandmothers who might want to talk to us, we're preparing workshops for grandmothers run by grandmothers and conversations with grandmothers, then please get in touch.
Cool, that sounds great.
That sounds so fun.
Yes.
Both my grandmothers are dead, but I was still here going, have I got a grandmother in Penwith? No. Thank you both very much. We're going to have a sort of turnaround of the room, and then the workshops are going to be sort of up and running, and we'll be here till 4 o'clock. You can make a rubbish sculpture and contribute to the installation, and think about how your identity and experiences intersect and connect with others, sort of globally or like right next to you. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.